Hey folks, welcome. So in this section of the course, we've been looking at API Gateway, and our diagrams feature Lambda functions a great deal. So in this lesson, we're going to see how we can use API Gateway to invoke our Lambda functions. We're basically connecting API Gateway to Lambda, sort of a front end to our Lambda. So we've seen enough diagrams of this. Let's see it in action. So let's enter the DevOps doctrine, and let's go to API Gateway, and let's select API Gateway with Lambda. So again, I'm showing this in most of my diagrams in this section. The simple fact is we can use API Gateway to trigger our Lambda functions. So when we call our gateway endpoint with get or put methods, API Gateway can invoke our Lambda function. These are our requests and responses. We've seen this, and we'll see it again in the API Gateway console. So if we look at our diagram, we can use API Gateway to trigger our Lambda functions with get or put request methods, and API Gateway can invoke our Lambda function. So API Gateway handles the request coming from the client and passes it to the Lambda function. The Lambda function returns a response to API Gateway, which then forwards it to the client. Now, in the management console, I'm going to go over to API Gateway and just click on one of these. And I'll click on the get method. So method request, integration request, method response, integration response. So what we're seeing in our diagram, I just tried to color code these. So the client makes a request and it goes to API Gateway. Now API Gateway can translate that any way it needs to and sends that request to Lambda. This triggers our Lambda function. Lambda does whatever it's programmed to do and then sends back a response. And again, just note the color coding. The color corresponds to the sender. So Lambda sends the response back to API Gateway. API Gateway translates this if necessary, sends a response back to the client. So first, let's go over to Lambda. I'm just going to create a simple Lambda function. And let's go to blueprints. It's not going to be a hello world function, but that's a simple starting point. So what we're going to do is generate random numbers. And this random number generators can be used for scientific applications, statistics, and if we're being totally honest, it can be used for gambling as well. As always, we need an execution role. Let's create one. And policy templates, simple microservice permissions. So this is usually sufficient privileges. There's our function. Now we're going to change this considerably, but we have to create it first, and then we can edit it. All right, now we can set up our Lambda function. Our choices are we can edit the code inline, and this is very small, so we will just do that. We can also upload a zip file, or we can store it in S3. But we're going to edit inline. It's a very small function. Okay, so first thing here we have is just a message. This will turn up in CloudWatch logs. Let's just keep that. We need to change our handler a little bit. All right, so right now we have an event and a context, and we talked about that in the Lambda section, but we also need a callback. So I'll just add that. And this callback is after our Lambda function runs and we want to return information back to the client. That's what this callback is for. All right, now let's write our function. And first thing we're going to do is clear everything out of our handler. And I'm going to stress that this is a very, very simple function. There's enough to learn in DevOps Pro without trying to learn Node.js or Python or Java or whatever. It's more important just to understand kind of the mechanics of this whole situation. We have our handler. When our Lambda function is invoked and executes, it has a callback. It's going to send information back to the client, or back toward the client, should I say, because it's going through API Gateway first. So let's just do a random number generator. And we need to define a minimum and maximum number limits for our generator. So we're going to have a min of 0 and a max of 1000. And then we just need to do some math functions on this number. All right, so to explain, this math random provides a random number between 0 and 1. So we're rounding it up, we're multiplying it by the max, and we're adding it to the min. Long story short, we're going to end up with our random number between 0 and 1000. All right, so by this time, we have our random number, and we just need to use the callback. Now, that first parameter is for an error. Obviously, we don't have any error handling, so we'll just send back a null. And then the second parameter is a success parameter. And what we can send back is our number. All right, that's it. Now we can scroll down, and we've looked at this before. Event variables, tags. There's our execution role. There's our memory. And this is a very small function. This is very sufficient. There's our timeout. That's also plenty of time. So that's it. Now we can save. All right, now before we go over to API Gateway, let's just test this. And let's create. And test again. All right, there's our response. A number between 0 and 1000. I'll just test a few times and just note the number changing. So we have a fully functioning Lambda function. Now, we want to use API Gateway as the front end to our function. Of course, this is a very simple function, but it could be any Lambda function. I just kept it simple. It's more important to focus on these steps, on the whole process. Let's go over to API Gateway. All right, so let's create a new API. And this is a REST API, new API, and let's just give it a name. And endpoint type, we'll just leave it at regional. And create API. Now we have to configure our API to do something. So let's go to Actions. And let's create a resource. All right, now let's create a new method for our resource. Create method, and let's just do a get. That's really all we would need to do. We're calling our Lambda function, and we want that random number. Click the checkbox. All right. Choose the integration point for your new method, and this is very important, of course. Lambda function, and that's what we want to do. Integrate with the existing HTTP endpoint. We can mock this up. Integrate with another AWS service. Integrate with a VPC link. But of course, we want a Lambda function. We need to specify the region, and that's correct, US East 1. But of course, we have other options. And then we just specify our Lambda function. And if we just type in the G, there it is. And we can click Save. Important information here. You are about to give API Gateway permission to invoke your Lambda function. Well, that's exactly what we want to do. So, okay. And of course, here's our handy requests and response, matching our diagram. Request starts as a client, goes through API Gateway, to Lambda, back from Lambda through the API Gateway to the client. And again, it's just important to understand this process going on here. This could be any Lambda function. As long as we know its name, API Gateway is going to know how to communicate with it. We specify the region and the name, and we're good to go. We know our Lambda function works. We've set up our API Gateway. We've connected it to our Lambda function. Now let's go ahead and deploy. Deployment stage, new stage. Let's just call it demo and deploy. All right, so we've deployed and we received this invoke URL. And it's very descriptive. So this URL is going to call API Gateway and our Lambda function is going to be invoked. Now, I'll tell you ahead of time, this is not going to work. So let's try this. Let's go back to API Gateway and let's just think about this. This is the URL from the demo stage, but let's drill down a bit. There is our get call. Let's click on that. There's our invoke URL, and note the tree structure. We'll bet this one works. There's our random number. Let's refresh. And just keep refreshing a few times. So we have success. So with that, we created a Lambda function, and then we created and deployed our API, which we connected to our Lambda function. And ultimately, from the client, we are invoking our Lambda function and successfully getting our payload returned to us, which is that random number. So that's it. It's pretty straightforward how API Gateway works with Lambda. Thank you for joining me in this lesson. Let's move on to the next.